Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the club. How are you today? When I came across the book Total Load Theory by Patricia Lemer, it immediately resonated with me. Just the title and the description alone, I knew right away it was going to articulate a concept that I talk about often here. And that is that the constant bombardment of toxins and stressors in modern life plays a significant role in the alarming rise of complex health conditions that we're seeing today. Things like autism, ADHD, Lyme disease, mold illness, anxiety, depression, mast cell activation syndrome, food allergies, autoimmune conditions, issues that our grandparents and great grandparents simply didn't face at the scale that we see now, but we feel them almost everywhere today. What this framework explains clearly is that it's rarely a single toxin, a single exposure, or even a simple genetic issue. More often, it's the cumulative burden, that total load that eventually exceeds what a person's body. And that final tipping point could be many things: another toxic exposure, a major hormone shift, a period of stress. The trigger may look different for everyone, but the overload was building long before it showed up as symptoms. As I expected, this book was everything I hoped it would be, and honestly, even more. So I'm truly grateful to have the author with us today. Patricia Lemer is a licensed professional counselor and has practiced as an educational diagnostician for over 40 years. She's also the author of Outsmarting Autism, the ultimate guide to management, healing, and prevention, and her latest and newest book, Total Load Theory: Transforming Lives in Autism, ADHD, LD, SPD, and Mental Health. Welcome, Patricia Lemer, to the Christian Health Club podcast.
Thank you, Chelsea, so much. That was such a beautiful introduction. I'm honored to be on your show.
I'm so happy you're here. I want to start by you just telling us about the evolution of your work and what you have seen over the last 40 years. I am sure it is a lot. And I've heard you speak about it on other shows, and it's really fascinating, the observations and the things that you've witnessed in your work. So take us through that.
Well, I've seen children become sicker and sicker as our world has become more and more toxic. And so when I got started in the late 60s, I was working primarily with children with genetic disorders: Down syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, Williams syndrome, and children who had had accidents. They had fallen out of trees, they'd been run over by a car, and are things that were tangible, and we knew exactly what had happened to them. As we got into the 70s, we started looking at learning and behavior problems. And those are not visible, tangible. They show up once in a while. They're unpredictable. And we don't know what to blame them on. Why is this child reversing his letters and numbers? Why can't he read with comprehension? Why does he have a meltdown in the middle of the grocery store? And we're guessing all over the place what is going on. At the same time, there were no laws mandating schools to help these kids. And so I was fortunate to be in Washington, D.C. during the 70s when the law was being written. And I was lucky that I knew lawyers and I could contribute to what were these categories of disability and what were the schools mandated to do to help these children. And that's how we ended up with an IEP, an individualized education plan, and how we ended up with accommodations, that the child didn't need a specific program, but he needed the environment to be more forgiving, that he could take untimed tests, that he could go to a separate room to study his material because too much noise, too bright lights, his friends distracting him made it hard for him to learn. And then in the 80s, we started seeing more and more attention problems. And in those years, we then started seeing the pharmaceutical companies getting involved with these kids. And I hated the idea of drugging kids. It just sent me to the moon. And so I got very involved in nutrition and kept asking families, well, what did he have for breakfast? What are his favorite foods? And I was so surprised that families all told me the same thing. Their kids were eating every combination of wheat and dairy product there was, even though they had different names like cereal and milk and bagels and cream cheese and macaroni and cheese and pizza. It essentially was the same food. And I started doing my research on what those foods did to kids' bodies and brains, and discovered that they had an opiate effect, and that these kids were drugging themselves, and that they were basically addicted to these foods. And even the most stalwart parents told me, I can't get him to eat anything else. Try green beans, Brussels sprouts, anything, a carrot. No, he won't do it. And I found that these picky eaters had an amazing tolerance for sameness, and that the parent often was afraid that if she didn't give the child what they wanted, that the child would starve to death. And they caved. They gave in to the child and made a peanut butter sandwich or gave him a piece of pizza. And so we had to work on both ends. We had to work on the child being more flexible, and we had to work on the parent being less forgiving and being more disciplined. And then we had some tests that we could run, and we could look at nutritional deficiencies and food sensitivities. And when these came in, we were able to stop guessing. And we were able to look at a child and say, you don't have celiac disease, but your body's response to the gluten in grains is off the chart. And it's a sensitivity that's not a true food allergy, but let's try a trial of no gluten. And the gluten-free, casein-free, soy-free diet became very popular. And a majority of kids started learning and acting more typically when we took these foods out of their diet. And we learned ways to get them to eat these new foods, because many of them had nutritional deficiencies, for instance, a zinc deficiency, which interfered with their taste buds. And so things didn't taste good. And it was no wonder they didn't want to eat them. And so I founded a nonprofit with a nutritionist named Kelly Dorfman. I don't know if you know her, but she would be a great person for you to have on your show. And Kelly wrote a book called Cure Your Child with Food. And she was the original food detective. What's going on with this child? What can I do to help this child? And so as kids got sicker and sicker, I got more and more involved with other disabilities, learning disabilities, attention deficit disorders. And then we saw more and more anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder and simply depression. And I knew that there had to be a food component to that, a nutritional component to those. But I was kind of alone in the dark. And it was hard to find colleagues in the 90s and the 2000s. But eventually the autism community got on board, and they realized that food made a huge difference. And there were other areas. I got very involved in optometry and in occupational therapy. And I was a case manager. I didn't see the kids directly. I depended on the experts to work with them in their therapies. And I was the one who helped prioritize those therapies and network families all over the world with practitioners who were on board. And finally, I realized after I updated Outsmarting Autism that I needed to be more inclusive in who I was writing for. And so when it went out of print, and I decided that it was important to write a legacy book, one more book then I just put up the umbrella and said, I'm going to include learning disabilities, attention problems, all the mental health disorders, because you and I know that these have the same underlying root causes and the same treatments work for all these kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's amazing. Before ahead of your time with the understanding that nutritional component. That is amazing. And so I want to go back to the opioid effect. This is something that I think a lot of parents probably are not aware of. A lot of parents are like, you're describing my children. All they want to eat are these. Could you explain that effect a little bit more so they're understanding what that means and what's happening?
Well, Karen Sarusi is a mom of a child who's now a grown adult. And she did the homework on this. And she wrote one of the first books by doing her research on how the casein, which is the protein in dairy products, and the gluten, which is the protein in grains, combine to form an opiate. And it is just like the opiate epidemic that we're encountering now with pharmaceuticals. And these kids realized that their tummies felt better and that their brains worked better when they were on these drugs, this food drug. And so they were really drugging themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, this is true. I mean, this also, I think everything that you do, your work has been focused toward children over the years, but this also applies to adults, to grown-ups, to everyone. All of these things, with all of the toxic load, this cumulative toxic load applies to everybody, which is why I think it's important to, get this message out there more. And it really uncovers these root causes, like you said. So let's talk about some of those that you have seen over the years. Obviously food is one. What are some others, and what are they doing to the body and the brain?
Well, as the world has become more processed and more toxic, and products have all kinds of chemicals and colors and everything in them, our bodies are absorbing these through our skin, through digestion. So, for instance, if you're using Windex or Murphy's Oil or Tide or some of the original products, have poisonous chemicals in them. And it allowed them to do their job, but nobody thought about what they were doing to our bodies and brains. And the body doesn't know what to do with, say, mercury or fluoride or aluminum. And we just willy-nilly added them with some true and some made up ideas of what they did. For instance, fluoride in toothpaste and fluoride in the water, we've just learned a lot about that because RFK Jr. has taught us that fluoride is a neurotoxin and it agitates the nervous system. Yes, it might save our teeth, but so does good flossing and good brushing and other hygiene habits. So we don't want to add toxins to our lives. We don't want them to be in our cleaners. We don't want them to be in our personal care products like our shampoo and our makeup. We want to see what the ingredients are, because if there's lead in your lipstick, you and I are both wearing lipstick, it's hard to find one that is a natural lipstick in a non-petroleum carrier, but it's possible. We can find it. And you have to read labels. You have to be vigilant. Every single product that you use, you want to know, does this have something poisonous in it that's going to hurt my child? And my mother used to say, oh, Patty, it's just a little bit. But all those little bits add up. And that's what total load is. It's Just a little bit may not hurt you, but a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of something else turns into a lot. And a lot starts causing problems. It may be just a rash. It may be a cough. It may be disturbing your sleep, or it may be causing something as serious as a seizure. And the first time a child goes over his own personal limit and hits a load too big for his body to tolerate, that's not the first sign. That's not the first symptom. That seizure came after all kinds of less serious symptoms that the doctor may have said, oh, 5 ear infections, that's not a big deal today. It's normal. No, it isn't. It's today's normal, but children aren't supposed to have ear infections. And there's a classic study that showed that 90+% of ear infections were caused by food that the child's body didn't know what to do with. And the most common food are dairy products that cause ear infections. And Talal Nasuli found that at Georgetown University. I believe it was in the 80s or the 90s. And I've quoted that study over and over and over again, but it's gotten lost. So what do we do instead? We put tubes in the child's ears and we don't change the diet. Why? Because it's too hard. And it's inconvenient. Yes, it is. But it gets to the root cause instead of masking the symptom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you said about it. And again, it's what your book is saying is that it's all these little exposures added up. But when you try to tell somebody, you shouldn't use Tide, or, that's toxic, or people roll their eyes like, you're so over the top. And it's not just that one thing, although it is that one thing adding to the load, but you put all of these things together and it's just too much for their body. And like you said, there's so many small symptoms. Always say, your body is always talking to you, and it's going to start in a little whisper. It's going to be like, you're going to get these kind of smaller symptoms, and that's telling you your body is something. And if you're not listening, it's going to slap you upside the head with a big symptom, right, like a seizure or infancy or whatever it is. But you're right. There's always those little symptom clues that are leading up to that, for sure, that people seem to miss.
So for people who are stuck on their detergent that they've used for their whole lives because their mother used it, or have used the same kind of makeup because they love the color and they love the way it makes them look, you can go to the Environmental Working Group website, ewg.org, and you can find out alternatives to what you're using. You first put in what you are using, and it has a huge database, and hopefully it'll have the product that you use in there, and it'll grade it from A to failing. And then it will give you more healthy alternatives. So if you're using a typical brand of lipstick, that they'll say it's no good, it's a D, because it has lead in it. And every time you lick your lips, you're getting a little bit of lead. And we know lead is toxic to the brain. And so then it'll make some suggestions. Here's a brand that is lead-free. So why don't you try that? And it takes a year or more to switch over from your toxic products to a non-toxic lifestyle. And I do a lot of traveling, and I often stay at friends and family, and they all say to me, Patty, go through my products. What am I using that's poisonous? What do I need to get rid of? And almost always I can find something that they just weren't aware, and we reach for it by habit at the grocery store. It makes our trip easier. We've always used it, but let's start looking for less toxic products that do the job. And for cleaning, the best thing is to make your own. Those of us who've been in this don't like buying water We buy Windex and it's all water with a few chemicals in it that aren't very good. So how about apple cider vinegar, just vinegar and water? You'll be surprised how sparkly your windows will be.
Absolutely. And honestly, well, it can be overwhelming, when we start talking about changing our products and people feel overwhelmed. And like you said, I mean, it's a journey and it takes a while and, something runs out, just try something different the next time. But frankly, when we think about it, these are actually the easier things that you can do is to replace your products. There are more exposures that are, well, more of a challenge to avoid, such as, and we can, but I'd love you to talk a little bit about glyphosate, which is such a huge exposure. It's so prevalent in food. I'll use that, in quotation marks. We'll use that a little bit loosely, but food and water and what is just, kind of loosely, what is that doing to the body?
So glyphosate is an herbicide and it's known as Roundup. And that's what farmers are using to keep the bugs away. And it is a very powerful herbicide that gets in deep into the plant and even into the seeds. And so you can't scrub it off. And they thought at first that it didn't interfere with human digestion, but we have found that that isn't true. That what it does is it changes our microbiome by interfering with a certain pathway. And foods, almost all of the most popular foods like wheat and corn and soybeans and many vegetables are grown with glyphosate. And anything that's not organic or not GMO has glyphosate. GMO, we do not want our plants to be grown with glyphosate. And so we want to buy organic whenever possible. And organic is expensive for the farmer to get certified. So there may be some local farmers who say, I don't use any chemicals, no glyphosate, but I'm not certified organic. And those are your local farmers at your local farmers market. You want to get to know them. But also, Chelsea, the wind blows. So if this well-meaning farmer is next door to a not so savvy farmer, the glyphosate can blow. And so you want to be able to eat as clean and as glyphosate free as you can. And it's not possible to be 100% free, which is why you have to work on your detoxification organs. You have to defecate daily, at least once. You've got to urinate and you've got to be well hydrated so you can urinate frequently, and you want to sweat. Sweating is another wonderful way to detoxify. And so any way you can sweat, whether it's going for a brisk walk or working out in a gym or getting into a sauna, all of those things will get rid of the toxins that we have breathed and drunk in our water and eaten in our foods. And you have to be vigilant about it. You've got to make sure that those detoxification pathways are open and working.
Yeah. When we think about how exposed to these toxins, well, one thing you talked about in your book, and I've heard people say, is when we're looking just kind of in health issues, there's something in the body that shouldn't be there, and there's something that's missing from the body, right? Those are kind of some, if we want to boil it down really, really basically, we could say those two things, right? And so obviously removing what we can, like stop lipstick with the lead, avoid pesticides and herbicides in food. And so that's the first step. Also needing to, like you said, support these detoxification organs. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that these toxins not only are burdening the body, but they're stealing nutrients. They're stealing things that our body needs to be able to operate. That is what our body runs on. It's what we're made of. And so what I see a lot is, and you've seen this true, and I think this is an age-old question also, is that, it's chicken or the egg? Do we start like minerals? Do we start adding a bunch of stuff? And if you're adding a bunch of stuff, but you're not detoxing well or trying to detox, I've heard you use this. It's like, trying to, you're with the plug out, it's just not going to work. And so could you speak a little bit more to this concept and what's the best way to go about this in your opinion?
So we say, as you have stated, another way of saying it is get the bad stuff out and put the good stuff in. And so the very first thing is you want to stop exposures. And you stop exposures by the decisions you make of the products you buy. But they're environmental exposures that are hard to stop, like cell phone towers that are zapping you from near and far. And another exposure that you may be unaware of in your home is mold. Many of our homes are moldy. Anybody who has had a leak of any kind probably has mold somewhere behind the drywall. And so it's very, very important to have your home looked at to see if your family is being exposed to those mold spores. And they're ubiquitous. It's just so important to make sure that the environment isn't damp and moldy, because this is when you start seeing strange symptoms that don't go together, that you have rashes, that you can't sleep, that you have a subliminal cough, that all kinds of things that aren't bad, but they're little risk factors that, again, when they add up, they're problematic. So number one is to reduce exposures. Number two is to expel those things that you've already taken in before you got smart. And there, as you say, there's detoxifying foods. There's ways to increase the number of times we defecate each day. There's foods, there's herbs, there's vitamins, there's minerals, and we can suggest that everybody get a baseline to have a hair analysis done, because the hair is another detox organ. And I don't know a way to increase your hair detox, but your hair growth, but you can measure how much mercury, aluminum, cadmium is coming out in your hair by doing a hair analysis. And you have to have a baseline. And people say, well, should I take zinc? Should I take vitamin C? I don't know. I don't know how much you need. Everybody is different. We're all individuals. And whether or not you need a certain vitamin or mineral depends on your body's detoxification ability. And there's two genetic pathways that measure our detoxification ability. The first stage is methylation and the second stage is sulfation. And Sid Baker taught me to liken it to the two wash cycles in your washing machine. One gets the junk out of the cells, but they're still in your body. And then the second gets the junk out of your body with your urination and your pooping. So you have to have both good methylation and good sulfation. And there's a genetic mutation called the MTHFR. And if you, in your mind's eye, if you put some vowels in there, you can come up with a not very pretty swear word. And that's what many of our autism moms call that mutation. And many people who have detoxification problems have problems with their MTHFR pathways. And we want to know that. If you're not a good methylator, you're not going to be a good detoxifier. You're going to hold on to those toxins. And so there are nutritional ways that people like you and other good nutritionists know to get those pathways to be working better. And I have a sulfation pathway, which is this mutation, which is the second phase of detoxification. And that's called a SUOX, S-U-O-X pathway. And I take a mineral called molybdenum, which activates that sulfation pathway every single day. And it was a total game changer for my digestion.
Amazing. Yeah. So important to know that. But like you, I think kind of as we're talking, and like you said, we've got to, stop the exposure and then work on what we've already what our body's holding on to, right? To help to let that go, open those drainage pathways, the pooping, super important, and all of those other pathways. And then, be mindful also about adding in what we need, what we might be deficient in. But if we're not supporting that detoxification, we're just going to have to keep taking more and more of these supplements and vitamins and minerals and whatever it is, kind of and stop the bleeding, if you will.
Right. There's one other thing that everybody should be aware of, the use of Tylenol. And again, Robert Kennedy Jr. opened our eyes onto the dangers of Tylenol, which deplete our body of something called glutathione. And glutathione is essential to be able to detoxify. It's like a Pac-Man. It's going around our body, chomping on mercury and chomping on aluminum and chemicals and plastics. And every time you take Tylenol, you reduce the body's glutathione stores. And so you really don't want to take a Tylenol or acetaminophen containing product. You look for alternatives to that.
And that kind of takes my mind to a place that you do dedicate some time to in your book and in your career, and that is vaccines and vaccine injury. Because when I think of Tylenol, I think of how the recommendation over all these years, right. Okay, your baby's getting a vaccine. Make sure you give your baby Tylenol, which is just the absolute opposite thing of what we should be doing. But I'd love for you to just tell us your view, your experience, what you've seen, what you've helped with over the years in regards to vaccines.
Well, this was a real eye-opener for me. We all grew up with vaccines. So there's a lot of controversy on this subject that has destroyed communication between friends and among families. And it's one of the saddest things that's happening today. And people have been sold myths about vaccines, that the body needs vaccines to stay healthy. And you know that this isn't true. You're a nutritionist who depends on food and vitamins and minerals to stay healthy, not vaccines. So I wrote a chapter called Vaccines, the Myths of Vaccines. And I go through them one by one and show what the science, in fact, does say. And for instance, people believe that vaccinated children are healthier than unvaccinated children. And that simply isn't true. And study after study after study with hundreds of children, thousands of children, has shown that those children who have been fully vaccinated have more chronic illness. They don't have contagious illnesses like measles, mumps, chickenpox, but they have asthma, they have eczema, they have arthritis, chronic childhood arthritis. They have chronic diseases, diabetes, that make it harder for them to get through every day. And this is science. In the book, I do 10 of the vaccine myths, and people need to read what the science is. And the book, The Turtles All the Way Down, edited by my editor, Zoe O'Toole, and the Children's Health Defense Executive Director and President, Mary Holland, is a real eye-opener. Vaccines are not tested. They are given more frequently and earlier. And this is such a timely podcast because just last week, the numbers of vaccines in the childhood vaccination schedule has been cut. And so children are no longer required to have the hepatitis B vaccine within 24 hours of birth. That was a decision that was made for monetary reasons. It was a cash cow. And hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted disease. There's no reason for an infant to be given that vaccine in the first 24 hours. And so we get immunity differently when we get a disease than when we get it from a vaccination. Immunity from a disease like the measles is permanent. You can never get measles again if you get measles from your brother or sister. But if you get measles not naturally, but from a vaccine, your titers go up, your ability to fight the measles for an individualized length of time. And we all have our own personal immunity. And so the way the vaccination schedule works is that they do it the same way they do an annuity for life insurance. You need this much and I need that much. So we're going to average them together and we'll give that many booster shots. Or you need that much life insurance. But it's not individualized for you. And so before any parent gives a baby a booster or a child a booster, they should look and see, take a titer. Is that child still immune from the last time he got that shot? Because some people get lifetime immunity with only one shot. Some people never get lifetime immunity, and some are in between. And so you don't want to be worked on as an average. You want to be worked on for your immune system. And hopefully doctors will be more open now going forward that the schedule has not only been reduced, but in the past, doctors were paid by insurance companies for having a fully vaccinated practice. And that now has been outlawed. So I think we're making progress.
Good. Yeah, I hope so. Will you tell us some of the more toxic and controversial ingredients in some of these vaccines that have been the final straw, if you will, that camel's back, with children, anybody really?
Well, when my daughter was getting vaccinated, there were individual single valent shots. So she could get a tetanus shot. She could get a chickenpox shot or a measles shot. But for convenience, they made these vaccine cocktails. So the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, is a cocktail. And in order not to put too much of all those pathogens in it and to stabilize it, they put in what are called adjuvants, which are additives that preserve and stabilize this crazy combination of pathogens. You don't get exposed to measles, mumps, and rubella on the playground in the same day. So when you do it through a shot, you can't use too much of those pathogens. So in order to raise an immune response, they have to put some other problematic ingredients in. And so originally it was mercury, and in the form of a preservative called thimerosal. And in the late 80s, early 90s, there was just a little bit, like my mother said, Patty, just a little bit of thimerosal in there. But a little bit times all these boosters turned into a lot. And there was a classic paper written about autism being a form of mercury poisoning. Mercury is the second most toxic element on the planet next to plutonium. And so adding a teeny tiny bit of mercury over and over and over and over and over again added up to a huge load for a baby, for a toddler. And that is what was going on in the early days of autism, was that it was a form of mercury poisoning. And there were hearings, there were congressional hearings, and they took the mercury out of the vaccines. And that was a good thing. Unfortunately, they had to put something else in to get that immune response. And so the newest adjuvant is aluminum. Well, if you read up on aluminum as a toxin, the body doesn't know what to do with that either. And so now we're getting a trace of aluminum here and there, and then you're getting something called propylene glycol, which is antifreeze. And these are things that are in the vaccines that your body has to make a decision about what to do with it and how is it going to get out of the body.
Yeah. And like you said, it's just the body is overloaded.
Yeah.
It's having to make a lot of decisions like, oh my word. I mean, what am I going to do with all this stuff? Right. And your body, it's just like with anything, yeah, you can eat Cheetos, right? And you can eat them and put them in your body. Your body has to make decisions about what to do. Your body is forced to deal with it. And over time, it's the Cheetos, it's the vaccine, it's your lipstick, it's it's the dish cleaner, it's the whatever. Again, kind of bringing it back to that total load. And, again, like you said, it's every person, their genetic disposition, their load exposure. It's going to be different for every person. But when we take it back down to these roots, right, it is these roots for so many of these complex health conditions that we're seeing today. They're just kind of manifesting in people differently. But when we come back to the roots, this is really what we're looking at, this like toxic pool of things that we're exposing our body to.
Right. So one of the things that's in this new book on total load that I didn't have in either version of Outsmarting Autism is the role of the nervous system and the vagus nerve. And I learned about this from Dr. Neil Nathan, who is a functional medicine doctor par excellence, who's written several books. But his newest book was The Sensitive Patient's Healing Guide. And in it, he has treated thousands of patients with all kinds of disorders. But he was interested in the ones who didn't get well. And he discovered even though they did all the right interventions, many of them had some nervous system dysregulation caused by trauma. And many of our people, both on the spectrum with mental health disorders, attention deficits, if you take a good history, there is trauma that exists not only in their biological lives, but in past generations. And this trauma has not been resolved. It has been sometimes kept a secret of a family member who committed a crime or suicided or something unusual that the family had shame about or just did not feel comfortable talking about. And so he raised my consciousness on the importance of addressing trauma. And the trauma is held in the vagus nerve. And Dr. Steve Porges, who is a psychologist, not an MD, discovered the importance of the vagus nerve and that it wasn't, in fact, one nerve, but that it had two branches. And the body's decision about what to do to manage trauma, whether to fight or go flight or freeze, and that situation is a more primitive response puts the body into a hypervigilant situation where it cannot heal. And so I put this up front in the book that we have to take a really good history that evaluates whether trauma might in fact be impeding the body's ability to heal. And if so, it has to be addressed through nervous system regulation, either through reflex integration, through any kind of trauma intervention, which I talk about in the book. And once the nervous system feels safe and gets out of this fight or flight mode, then it can take advantage of absorbing those nutrients, of working through mast cell activation, on working through the motor and the social and the communication challenges. But until we address that vagus nerve, it's not going to happen.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because this is one thing I wanted to talk to you about and ask you about. I think of that fight or flight mode, kind of like the body with its dukes up, like you're just always on alert. You're always like ready to deal with that threat. And you cannot heal in that parasympathetic state.
No. And people use that fight. The dukes are up in their language. He's fighting cancer. He's fighting his arthritis.
Right.
And a fight mode is not healing. You've got to feel safe and look with gratitude to what is the message here? What is your body trying to tell you? And as you said, if you're knocking on the door and you're not listening, you're going to start banging on the door and screaming, and then maybe you'll listen.
Yeah, that's right. And I misspoke. I meant sympathetic. We've got to be in a parasympathetic state to be able to heal. But yeah, and I love in your book that you go through, again, it was a good resource for somebody like me. I read about a lot of therapies that I'd heard about before, but wasn't exactly familiar with. And so I loved it as a good resource, going through all of the toxic, potentials, plus, the information on the vaccine, plus this nervous system regulation and all of these therapies, there's just a suite of therapies that can be used. It's really not just one thing. I'm actually right now, we had a family tragedy happen to us over the summer. We lost some family members in a flood here in Texas. And I have one of our practitioners uses the Safe and Sound protocol in her practice. And so I'm working with her just, really actively to take care of my nervous system at this time. It's been a rough 6 months, in our family. And so you talk about that in there, the Safe and Sound protocol as one of those therapies that can be used. There's a lot of good things that we can do, but more and more we are discovering that without this nervous system regulation, without, calming the body, making it feel safe, unclenching from that dukes up posture, very, very difficult to move the needle or get anywhere with long-term healing.
Right. This book also has a unique feature called the AI Companion. And this is a gift to me from a tech guy who lives in Australia. And I didn't know anything about him and found out via Facebook that he attributes his severely autistic son recovery from following my prioritized therapies in outsmarting autism.
Wow.
And he has gifted me this AI companion, which allows anybody who buys the book to personally ask a database like a ChatGPT kind of a program, personal questions. And you can ask it by typing in the question or by verbally doing it. And we're now doing it in 8 different languages. And he has cloned my voice so that it potentially can answer you in over 70 different languages. So if you go to
Wow.
ai.patricialemer.com, you can ask a couple of questions free without buying the book. And then at some point, it will require a proof of purchase for you to do this infinitely. You can keep asking your own questions, and it'll print it or it'll talk to you. And it also includes, in the database, it includes episodes from my personal podcast called The Autism Detective. And I'm not as far along as you in the podcast. I have about 120 episodes that I've done. And in those, it brings up a couple of podcasts that are germane to your question. And then it actually allows you to listen to my podcast guest answer your question.
Wow, that is amazing. What a gift.
Fiction, Chelsea. It's really, really amazing.
What a gift.
Yeah.
And what a story. What a beautiful way for that man to give back and for you to discover that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, good. That's great to know. Yeah, that is helpful. The book, again, is just such a really good resource for all of those things. I was telling you how I really feel like our Christian health practitioners that we train in the School of Christian Health and Nutrition, this should be some reading that they need to do. This would be a good book to have just because it does expose you to so many of the knowledge of the toxins and the therapies that are available. It's hard to keep your finger on the pulse of everything that's out there. So I really appreciated it for that. Well, this has been really wonderful to speak with you. Before you go, I have to ask you the question, I guess, the anchor questions. And the first one is, what is your anchor meal? So a go-to healthy meal that you eat over and over.
My anchor meal, without question, is salmon and a green vegetable. And I can eat salmon 3 times a day. I try very hard to get good quality. I love salmon that's wild is my first choice, but I believe that even farmed salmon with the amount of essential fats and omega-3 fats is fine if you're doing good detoxification. And I love salmon eggs, the roe to salmon. I love smoked salmon. So I could easily have smoked salmon for breakfast and a piece of broiled salmon for dinner. And then I add broccoli or asparagus or Brussels sprouts or whatever happens to be fresh in the market. So I'm a salmon
I love
girl.
it. You're a salmon girl. Well, that's a good one. Okay. And how about an anchor verse, which is a favorite Bible scripture, any kind of verse that speaks to you?
So let me find it here. I don't have it memorized. This is from Maimonides. I'm Jewish, and so I depend on the Old Testament, and Maimonides is a prophet of Judaism, just like Jesus. And the quote that I like from Maimonides, I think you will appreciate, and it's, a person must be able to keep the body healthy and whole, for it is impossible to understand and know the Creator when one is sick. Therefore, one should avoid whatever harms the body and accustom oneself to that which is healthful. I mean, it just,
I love it.
It explains everything, doesn't it? If you're sick, you can't have a spiritual practice. You have to put your focus onto staying well, and especially if you're in a helping profession who helps others. And Maimonides, who was both a philosopher and a physician, viewed maintaining health not just as a personal preference, but as a religious obligation, because the body is a vessel. It allows us to study, to pray, and to do what are called mitzvahs, which are good deeds. And if the vessel is broken or neglected, we can't fully serve our Creator. And so choosing healthful foods and a healthy lifestyle is a spiritual act and obligation because it gives us a deeper connection with the divine.
Yes, I love that so much. It's stewardship. We are called to steward the gifts we've been given, which includes our physical body. I hope you don't mind my asking, but everybody knows, those are the anchor questions that I ask everyone at the end of an episode. And so when I am kind of going back and forth with guests that I want to have on the show, I always let them know that, just because I don't want any curveballs, thrown at the end.
Right.
I like people to kind of think about it. And, when I'm potentially talking to a guest, I don't know what their religious affiliation is, right? It's not something that's always obvious. And so that's another kind of almost a litmus test a little bit. I throw that out there. And if the person is okay with that, whether they are Christian or not, if they are okay and they have something like you brought to us today to share, then I'm okay with that. I just kind of let the Holy Spirit guide me on that. But what I wanted to ask you, because I've never asked, I've had other Jewish people on before, and some that I'm not actually sure, I think agnostic, but I'm just curious, like, what were your thoughts about coming on here when you saw the title? I mean, you let me know right away, well, I'm Jewish, and I told you what I said, if it's okay with me, if it's okay with you. So what were your thoughts about it?
Well, I think in today's world, with increased anti-Semitism, I didn't feel comfortable putting myself in a position where there had any chance of there being some anti-Semitism. I wanted to be totally transparent. And so I was very comfortable with that this was not a hidden way of being anti-Semitic. That wasn't clear that wasn't an issue. And second, I have been a chameleon for my whole life. I've gone to Christian schools. I grew up in an Episcopal day school.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And it was during a time when there were quotas. There were Jewish quotas. And so I felt very honored to be one of two Jews in my class. And, today that sounds just so outrageous that there were Jewish quotas.
Yeah.
And they knew who was Jewish and who wasn't. And I moved away from Pittsburgh, where I was born and raised, and I go back 5 generations. And I went to Atlanta in the 60s, and I went to another Christian school. So I'm very comfortable in a Christian background, and I'm probably know more about the New Testament than most of my Jewish friends because I had to study it. And I went to chapel every morning, and I can sing every verse of Onward Christian Soldiers. So I'm very comfortable in that environment. But I still am a little cautious. So when I moved away, and one of my mother's friends died, and she came to Pittsburgh for the funeral, and we were in the receiving line talking to people, and this bald man came up to her, and he said, I never got to thank you. And she said, thank me for what? And he said, when you and your family moved away from Pittsburgh, I got your son's Jewish space at that Christian school.
Wow.
He said, because there was a quota, there was a wait list to get in. And when you moved, you opened up one of the Jewish spaces, and I was privileged to get it. So I thank you.
Oh my goodness, that's wild.
And people today don't, even my classmates back then didn't realize it. There was not anti-Semitism. It was just the way the school was run.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
We're a Christian school. We'll give 2 spaces to smart Jewish kids. So I was very fortunate. that I had a very ecumenical education in a Christian school.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow. Well, that's good to know. Well, really grateful that you said yes to today and being a guest on here.
It's been a real fun talking to you. I love that you combine your soul and your spirit and your spiritual practice with your profession. I think it's a fantastic combination. And I talk in my book about the importance of having a spiritual connection. The world doesn't revolve around you, anybody, any of us. You have to have some belief in a higher being.
Yes. Amen to that. Spirit, mind, body. It's got to be healthy in all ways for sure. Well, where can people find you, get the book, find you, connect with you? Tell us more.
So patricialemer.com, Lemer spelled Lemer, and that's my main website. And I'm working on a website for the book called totalloadtheory.com. It's not up yet, but I'm all over YouTube and the internet. As you mentioned in your introduction, I've been doing this a long time. I'm turning 80 next month. I had been used to saying next year. It now is next year. So it's next month.
We're here.
Yep. So I'm excited, and I'm not done yet. There's more out there. There's more families to help. It's never too late, Chelsea. The book goes into working with young adults and what happens when mommy and daddy aren't here anymore. We've got to plan for the future. And so we're always getting new programs. We're learning new things. And even if your family member is an adult, I guarantee that this book will help them at least 10%, 20%, maybe even 30% more. So that the idea of independence is not impossible. And we're not trying to change people's personalities. We embrace their quirkiness and their neurodiversity. We're trying to maximize their potential. And whatever I can do to help people do that, I'm available. They can reach me by email, developdelay@gmail. I use that email, and I'm basically retired, but I'm happy once you've read the book to answer your questions that AI doesn't answer for you.
Amazing. Amazing. You're such an inspiration in your body of work. It's just wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Patty, for being here. And thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you have a healthy and blessed week, and I will talk to you soon.